Welcome to our YouTube channel, The Alien Tales, and please ensure that you have subscribed.
We were the last two beings on a dead planet, and she wasn't even human. I don't know who caused the extinction. I only know we survived. Now it's just her and me, and she doesn't speak my language, but she knows my heart. The silence of Kepler 442b had become my constant companion long before I met her. 3 years of nothing but the whisper of recycled air through my habitat's vents, the soft hum of life support systems keeping me alive in a world that had forgotten how to live. The research station felt smaller every day, its corridors echoing with the ghosts of 37 colleagues who would never return from their final expedition. I should have gone mad by now. Dr. Sarah Chun, the mission psychologist, had warned us during training that isolation could break a human mind in as little as 6 months. But perhaps I had already broken, and this was simply what the pieces looked like when they settled. My morning routine never varied. Check atmospheric readings, tend the hydroponics bay, scan for signals from Earth, always nothing, and then sit by the observation deck's massive viewport, watching 2 copper-colored suns paint the dead landscape in shades of rust and amber. The indigenous civilization that once thrived here had left behind only geometric stone structures that defied our understanding of physics and beauty. They'd managed to make even their ruins look alive. It was on day 1127 of my solitude that everything changed. I was calibrating the radio telescope, hoping against hope for even the faintest whisper from home, when the proximity sensors screamed. Something was approaching the station, something that wasn't debris or a wandering asteroid, something deliberate. Through the viewport, I watched it descend, a craft unlike anything in our databases. Where human ships were angular, functional, built for efficiency and survival, this vessel seemed grown rather than constructed. Its surface rippled like liquid mercury, shifting colors as it moved through the atmosphere. It landed without a sound in the valley below my station, and for the first time in over 3 years, I was no longer alone. My hands shook as I armed the station's automated defenses. Not that they'd proven effective against whatever had eliminated the indigenous population. But as I watched through the scope, a single figure emerged from the craft. The distance made details impossible, but the way it moved, there was something achingly familiar about its gait, as if I was watching an echo of humanity itself. I sealed my envirosuit and stepped outside for the first time in months. The planet's thin atmosphere made every breath a conscious effort, but I had to know. I had to see. She stood at the edge of my station's perimeter, and when I saw her face, my heart forgot how to beat. She was humanoid, but definitely not human. Her skin held an opalescent quality that shifted between pearl and silver as she moved. Her eyes, her eyes were larger than ours, a deep violet that seemed to contain entire nebulae. Her hair, if you could call it that, moved independently of any wind, flowing like liquid starlight around her shoulders. She wore no suit, breathed the thin air as easily as I breathed recycled oxygen. But it was her expression that undid me. She looked at me with such profound sadness, such desperate hope, that I knew immediately she was as alone as I was. "Hello," I said, then felt foolish. Of course she wouldn't understand English. She tilted her head, studying me with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but somehow wasn't. When she spoke, her voice was like music made from wind chimes and distant thunder. I couldn't understand a single word, but I heard the loneliness in every syllable. I gestured toward the station, an invitation. She looked from me to the building and back again, then nodded, a gesture that surprised me with its familiarity. Some things, it seemed, were universal. Her name, as near as I could pronounce it, was Zephyra. She told me this on our second day together, pointing to herself and producing a sound like a gentle breeze through crystal caverns. In return, I taught her my name, Marcus, which she repeated with careful precision, her voice making even those simple syllables sound like poetry. Communication was frustrating at first. I'd built my entire career on language, on precise scientific terminology and detailed reports. But with Zephyra, I had to learn all over again. We started with simple gestures, basic needs. Food, though she didn't seem to eat the same things I did. Water, which she approached with reverence, as if it were sacred. Sleep, though I wasn't sure she slept the way humans did. She'd established herself in one of the station's unused quarters, somehow making the sterile environment feel warm and alive. Her belongings, what few she had, seemed to pulse with their own inner light. When she touched the walls, the metal would shimmer, taking on properties I couldn't begin to explain. By the end of the first week, I realized she wasn't just intelligent. She was brilliant. She absorbed information at an impossible rate, picking up English words and concepts with startling speed. More than that, she seemed to understand things about the station systems that had taken me years to master. "Your people," she said one evening, her accent thick but her meaning clear. "Where are they?" I'd been dreading this conversation. How do you explain extinction to someone who might be the last of her own kind? I showed her the records, the final transmissions from Earth before the silence began. The plague that had swept across humanity faster than we could understand it, taking billions of lives in a matter of months. The desperate escape missions to the colonies, none of which had been heard from since. She listened with growing horror, her violet eyes darkening like storm clouds. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "My people too," she finally whispered. "All gone." That night, I heard her crying through the walls, a sound like crystal breaking in perfect harmony. I wanted to comfort her, but didn't know how. We were strangers, after all, members of different species who had known each other for barely a week. In the morning, I found her in the observation deck, staring out at the dead landscape. She'd removed her outer garment, revealing that her luminescent skin was covered in patterns that shifted like living constellations. Without thinking, I sat beside her. "I'm sorry," I said, though I knew the words were inadequate. She looked at me and I saw recognition there, not just of my words, but of something deeper. She placed her hand on mine, and I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. Her skin tingled where it touched mine, and for a moment, I could swear I felt what she was feeling, grief that matched my own, but also something else. Relief, maybe, or hope. We developed our own language over the following weeks, a mixture of her musical words and my awkward attempts at pronunciation, supplemented by gestures and drawings. She was an artist, I learned, or at least something analogous to it in her culture. The patterns on her skin weren't just decorative. They told stories, conveyed emotions, served as a form of communication I was only beginning to understand. She showed me how to read them, tracing the shifting designs with her finger as she spoke. A spiral here meant joy. Intersecting lines there indicated discovery. Complex geometric patterns express concepts I didn't have words for, emotional states that perhaps humans had never experienced. In return, I taught her about human art, showing her the digital archives I'd brought from Earth. She was fascinated by our paintings, our music, our poetry. She seemed particularly drawn to the love songs, though she had trouble understanding the concept at first. "Humans choose mates for emotion?" she asked one day, her head tilted in that curious way she had. "Sometimes," I said. "When we're lucky." She considered this, her skin patterns shifting through what I'd learned meant deep thought. "My people chose for compatibility, for species continuation. Emotion was," she struggled for the word, "secondary. Was it for you?" The question surprised us both. I hadn't meant to ask it, and she clearly hadn't expected it. Her skin flushed with colors I'd never seen before, a cascade of silver and rose that was heartbreakingly beautiful. "I never chose," she said quietly. "Before the ending, I was—" Another pause as she searched for words. "Unpaired. My parents said I was too different, too interested in other worlds, other species. They said I would bring chaos to our perfect order." There was pain in her voice, an old wound that had never properly healed. Without thinking, I reached out and touched the patterns on her arm. They flowed toward my fingers like iron filings to a magnet, and I felt her emotions pulse through the connection. Loneliness, rejection, but also fierce independence. "Their loss," I said, and meant it. She smiled then, a human expression she'd learned from watching me. It transformed her face completely, making her seem less alien and more, I don't know, just more. That was the moment I knew I was falling in love with her. It should have been impossible. We were different species, after all, separated by millions of years of evolution and vast differences in culture and biology. But love, I was learning, had its own logic. It wasn't about compatibility or practical concerns or species continuation. It was about recognizing something in another being that called to something in yourself. I loved the way she moved, fluid and graceful as if gravity were merely a suggestion. I loved how her curiosity about the universe seemed boundless, how she could spend hours studying a single flower in the hydroponics bay, watching it grow with an intensity that made me see beauty I'd previously overlooked. I loved her laugh, a sound like silver bells caught in a solar wind. Most of all, I loved how she looked at me, not like I was her last hope for companionship, but like I was someone worth knowing for my own sake. The problem was telling her. Human courtship rituals seemed absurd when I tried to imagine applying them here. Should I bring her flowers? She could make them bloom with a touch. Should I cook her dinner? She seemed to photosynthesize, absorbing energy directly from the twin suns. Should I write her poetry? She spoke in colors and light, in emotional spectrums I could barely perceive. I was working up the courage to say something, anything, when she nearly died. It happened during her 5th week at the station. I'd noticed she was spending more and more time outside, standing in direct sunlight with her arms spread wide. I'd assumed it was how she fed, like the flowers she loved so much. I didn't realize she was starving. I found her collapsed in the observation deck, her normally opalescent skin gone dull and gray. Her breathing was shallow, irregular, and the patterns on her body flickered like dying embers. Zephyra! I knelt beside her, afraid to touch her but unable to stay away. What's wrong? What can I do? She opened her eyes with effort. Home star, she whispered. I need home star, of course. She wasn't human. Why had I assumed our sun could sustain her the way hers could? I'd been slowly watching her waste away and been too ignorant to understand. Where? I asked. Where is your home star? She lifted a trembling hand toward the viewport. In the distance, barely visible against the orange sky, a third sun peeked over the horizon. Smaller than the twins that dominated this system, cool and blue-white where theirs were hot and copper. Her star. Her home. Without hesitation, I scooped her into my arms. She weighed almost nothing, as if she were becoming translucent. I carried her to the station's emergency shuttle, my mind racing through calculations. The navigation system had cataloged that star years ago, too distant for a casual visit, but not impossible with the shuttle's extended range capabilities. The journey took 6 hours. For most of it, I thought I was going to lose her. She lay in the passenger seat, unconscious, her skin growing more transparent by the hour. I could see the circulatory system beneath, not blood vessels but channels of light, growing dimmer as we traveled. But as we approached her star, something miraculous happened. Her skin began to shimmer again. The light channels brightened, and when the first rays of that blue-white sun touched her through the shuttle's viewport, she gasped and opened her eyes. Marcus? She said, and my name in her voice was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. I'm here, I said. You're safe. She sat up slowly, drinking in the light of her home star. Color flowed back into her skin, vibrant and alive. The patterns returned, more complex and beautiful than I'd ever seen them. She was like a flower blooming in fast forward, and I couldn't look away. You saved me, she said, turning to look at me with those impossible violet eyes. Of course I did, I said. It hadn't been a choice, not really. I caught myself suddenly shy, but she was reading my patterns too in her own way. She reached out and touched my face with fingers that sparked with warm electricity. Love, she said carefully, testing the word. I learned this from your music. I hoped. I love you, I said, the words tumbling out all at once. I know it's crazy. I know we're different species. I know it can't lead anywhere, but I love you. She was quiet for a long moment, her patterns shifting through colors I had no names for. Then she smiled, and her whole being seemed to glow brighter. Different species, she agreed. But same heart, yes? Same loneliness. Same hope. She leaned closer, her forehead touching mine. I love you too, Marcus. A strange word for what I feel, but closest one you have. We stayed in orbit around her star for 3 days, and they were the happiest of my life. She showed me things I'd never imagined. how to see the stellar wind as patterns of light, how to feel the star's magnetic field like music through the shuttle's hull. In return, I shared human traditions, read her poetry by Shakespeare and Neruda, played her everything from Mozart to the Beatles. On the second night, we made love or something analogous to it. I'd been afraid we were too different, that physical intimacy would be impossible. But her species, it turned out, expressed love through connection in ways that made pure human sexuality seem almost primitive. When she touched me, I felt what she felt. When I held her, she experienced the universe through my senses. It was deeper than physical, more intimate than I'd thought possible. We became, for those brief days, truly one being. But we couldn't stay. The shuttle's life support was designed for short-range missions, and even with careful rationing, we had maybe a week of supplies. We had to return to the station, to the dead planet that had become our home. The return journey was bittersweet. Zephyra was strong again, fully charged by exposure to her star, but we both knew this was only temporary. Eventually, she would weaken again. The question was, what would we do then? I could build something, I said as we flew through the orange light of the twin suns. A solar collector, focused on your star's specific wavelength. It would be weak, but it might be enough to sustain you. She was quiet for a long time, staring out at the space between worlds. Or, she said finally, we could go home, to your star, to Earth. She turned to me, her eyes serious. My ship, it can travel between stars. Not fast like your stories, but possible. We could go together. The possibility hadn't occurred to me. Earth, if there was still an Earth to return to. The silence from home could mean anything. Maybe the plague had burned itself out. Maybe humanity had found a cure. Maybe there were survivors, struggling to rebuild civilization. Or maybe there was nothing left but empty cities and the bones of a dead species. It could be dangerous, I warned. We don't know what we'd find. More dangerous than staying here? Alone? She took my hand, her skin patterns shifting to show determination mixed with hope. We are last of our peoples, yes? If we do nothing, we are ending. But if we try, maybe we find beginning. She was right, of course. What future was there for us on this dead planet? We might survive, but we wouldn't live. We'd be maintaining existence, nothing more. But together, traveling to Earth, we might find something neither of us could have imagined. We spent the next 2 weeks preparing. I gathered every piece of scientific equipment I could fit in her ship, along with all the cultural artifacts from the station. Music, literature, art, anything that represented the best of what humanity had achieved. If Earth was truly dead, maybe we could preserve something of what we'd been. Zephyra prepared her ship for the long journey, using technologies I couldn't hope to understand. Watching her work was like watching magic. She would touch surfaces and they would flow into new configurations, speak to the ship's systems in her musical language and watch them respond like living things. On our last night on Kepler 442b, we stood together in the observation deck, looking out at the ruins of the indigenous civilization. The structures seemed to glow faintly in the light of the twin suns, eternal and beautiful. Do you think they would approve? I asked. The people who built those. If they knew we were leaving their world for mine. Zephyra considered this, her patterns shifting through contemplative colors. I think, she said slowly, they would understand. We cannot live in past. Cannot build future on bones of the dead. We must go where life calls us. She was right. We were the last, but we didn't have to be the end. The journey to Earth took 18 months. Zephyra's ship created a pocket of space-time that allowed faster-than-light travel. But even so, the distance was vast. We spent the time learning each other's languages, not just the words, but the deeper concepts behind them. I taught her about human philosophy, science, history. She taught me about her people's understanding of the universe, their art, their complex relationship with light and energy. Most importantly, we learned to truly be together. Two beings from different worlds, creating something new between them. As we approached the solar system, we both felt the weight of what we might find. Earth looked as blue and beautiful as ever from a distance, but long-range scans showed silence. No radio signals, no energy signatures of a thriving civilization. Just the quiet rotation of a world that might be holding its breath. We landed in what had once been New York City. I'd expected ruins, devastation, the aftermath of a civilization's collapse. Instead, I found something far more unsettling. A city that looked almost normal, as if everyone had simply left. Cars still sat in parking spaces, their interiors filled with vegetation. Skyscrapers stood intact, their windows darkened but unbroken. Central Park had grown wild, but it was still recognizably a park. And it was empty, completely, utterly empty. We explored for weeks, finding the same story everywhere. Homes with meals still on tables, now overgrown with vines. Airports with planes sitting on runways, slowly being reclaimed by nature. Everywhere, signs of a sudden but peaceful ending, as if humanity had simply decided to step out of existence all at once. The answers, when we found them, were in the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta. In the final days, as the plague reached its peak, something unexpected had happened. The virus had begun to change, not into something more deadly, but into something else entirely. The last report spoke of infected individuals simply fading. Not dying exactly, but becoming translucent, then transparent, then gone. They transcended, Zephyra said, reading the reports over my shoulder. Her English had become perfect over our months together, though she still chose her words with the precision of someone for whom they weren't native. Your plague, it was not ending. It was transformation. Into what? She gestured around us, at the city that hummed with a presence I couldn't quite define. Maybe they are still here, just different, beyond what we can see. It was a disturbing thought, but somehow comforting too. Maybe humanity hadn't died out. Maybe they just moved beyond physical existence, joining some larger cosmic consciousness. Maybe the silence had been not an ending but a graduation. We made our home in a brownstone on the Upper West Side, choosing it because it had a small garden where Zephyra could sit in Earth's sunlight. She'd grown fond of our son over the journey, finding that while it couldn't sustain her alone, it offered flavors of energy her home star lacked. I set up a lab in the basement, continuing my research. But now I had a new purpose, understanding not just the universe around us, but the bridge between my species and hers. We were living proof that love could transcend biology, that consciousness could find connection across vast differences. Zephyra filled the house with her art. She couldn't paint in the human sense, but she could shape light itself, creating sculptures from pure energy that danced through our rooms like captured auroras. She learned to cook human food, delighting in the way different ingredients combine to create new flavors. I taught her to read human literature, and she responded by composing songs in her own language that captured the emotional essence of what she'd read. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were building something entirely new. Years passed. We grew older, both of us, though her aging showed as shifts in the base color of her skin rather than wrinkles or gray hair. We never had children, couldn't have them in any biological sense, but we created other things together. Art that combined human and alien aesthetics. Music that played in frequencies both our species could hear. Philosophical discussions that lasted for days, exploring questions neither of our civilizations had thought to ask. And always we had each other. One evening, as we sat in our garden watching Earth's sun set over the Manhattan skyline, Zephyra turned to me with an expression I'd learned to recognize as mischief. I have surprise, she said, her patterns shifting to match her smile. Oh, she held out her hand, and in her palm, a small light began to grow. It pulsed with familiar patterns, my heartbeat, my brain waves, the electrical signatures that made me uniquely me. But woven through them were her own patterns, her light, her essence. Our child, she said simply. I stared at the light in wonder. Not a biological child, but something else. A new kind of consciousness born from our connection, our love given form and purpose. What is it? I whispered. Beginning, she said. New way to be. Part human, part my people, part something that never existed before. The light pulsed brighter. It will carry forward all we were, all we learned together. When we are gone, it will remain. I felt tears on my cheeks. A human response she'd learned to understand and appreciate. We were the last of our kinds, but we wouldn't be the ending. This light, this impossible fusion of two incompatible forms of life, would continue. It would explore the universe with human curiosity and alien wisdom, carrying forward the best of both our species. As night fell over the empty city, we sat together in comfortable silence, watching our creation pulse with life and possibility. Somewhere in the darkness, I thought I felt a presence, the transcended remnants of humanity, perhaps, observing and approving of what we'd built from the ashes of two dead worlds. We were the last two beings on a dead planet, and she wasn't even human. But together, we'd become something more than the sum of our parts. We'd become hope itself, proof that love could bridge any gap, that life could emerge from the most impossible circumstances. And in the garden of our small house on a silent world, surrounded by the ghosts of the past and the promise of the future, I knew that sometimes the ending of everything is just the beginning of something extraordinary. The universe was vast and full of wonders we'd never see, civilizations we'd never meet, questions we'd never answer. But we had each other and we had love, and in the end that was enough. More than enough, it was everything.